Welcome travelers, FlowCat here. Genshin Impact has some of the most satisfying combat that I've ever experienced. It's a beautiful system because it's really simple, but there's a lot of depth that you can explore once you get used to things. I see a lot of guides on how to build units, so I figured I would make this series on practical applications for how to learn roles, build team compositions, and design rotations for those teams. These concepts can be very challenging for new or old gamers alike. By the end of this series, you should have the information you need to attain a strong grasp of these concepts. Bringing these ideas into your gameplay can make challenging content easier, as well as clear up confusion about how certain units are supposed to be used. Before I tangent for too long, let's jump into the video. The first video of this series is the most important and the most basic. This is foundational to how I understand Genshin Impact's combat. We'll start from scratch. Well, what are roles? To understand this, RPGs have had a strong focus on team-based combat. In that case, individual units have a job to fulfill, or a role. In most RPGs, there's a triad between tank, healer, and DPS role. This has been a long-standing basis on which many game developers have iterated. In these types of games, usually tanks are the units that are on the field, attracting the enemy attention and taking the damage. What's interesting is that Genshin shakes up this formula. Tanks are no longer a relevant role in most situations because you only have one unit on the field at a time, and you can switch them off whenever they're low HP. Instead, Genshin focuses on team building in a different way. You have access to every unit's skill in real time, and every unit adds to your total damage potential. And they replace certain roles with utility skills like shields. Essentially, what I'm saying is that there are two ways to analyze a unit's kit. How much damage do they do, and what utility do they add to your team? What's required of you to clear the content in Genshin Impact is very minimal damage or knowledge of the unit's abilities, but if you enter the Abyss, you'll experience something different. As the content increases in difficulty, you need more utility to counter the variety of dangers, as well as enough damage to take down the mobs and beat the timers. But I digress. Let me list for you the roles that I use to define the units in Genshin Impact. First, we have the on-field carry, hyper carry DPS role. Second, we have the sub DPS burst DPS role. Then we have utility and healing. For example, in the DPS hypercarry category, we have units like Razor, Hu Tao, or Zhao. These are units that output a lot of damage, but take consistent field time to be utilized properly. In the sub DPS or burst DPS category, we have units like Beidou, Xinqiu, or Zhongli. These are units that can output near hypercarry levels of damage, but take very little field time, usually just enough to activate their skill. Utility units are units that add supportive elements to your team. This could be shield, elemental infusion, cooldown reduction, energy generation, amplification of damage. This is a broad category, but strong examples would be Chongyun, Benny, or even Electro Traveler. Finally, we have healers. These are units that primarily heal. Good examples of these units would be Jean, Kokomi, or Chi-Chi. At this point, some of you may be thinking, but wait, some of those units that you mentioned have elements of other roles in their kits. Xinqiu heals a little, Benny heals a lot, Hu Tao can be an effective burst DPS, and Beidou provides utility like a shield. This is what brings Genshin Impact's combat to an absurd layer of depth. Every unit has a primary role, or a role that their kit leans most into, but they also have elements of other roles sprinkled into their kits. This allows you to craft very clever team compositions. On top of that, Constellations can either add to the unit's primary role, buff up their second role, or even add an entirely new role. This is why it's so important to spend time with your units, read their talents, mess around with their skills practically, and find out what can they actually do for your team. Even after a unit's kit is announced, I theoretically understand how it should work and how much damage I should be doing. But there's always a lot of information that I learned from practical testing, spending hours messing around with different team compositions, different rotations, all sorts of things. And when you start to consider how a unit's role complements or synergizes with another unit, that's when it gets really complicated. For instance, at C6, with an elegy bow and a 4-piece noblesse set and another pyro unit in the team, my Amber is able to provide an 85% attack bonus for 12 seconds to the entire team every time she bursts. This allows me to use her burst to amp, her E to taunt and battery, and she does a little bit of damage as well as pyro application on top. But that's just one unit. Almost every unit in Genshin Impact can be built to play multiple roles. It's up to you to decide how to build them and in what team comps to use them in, which we will cover in part 2 of this video series, building team compositions. So that'll bring us to the end of the first video in this series. I hope it was helpful. I'd love to see you in some of my other videos. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. And as always, stay healthy, stay hydrated, peace.